Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
It's not perfect, but it's such a massive improvement from burning a bunch of oil in a power station. So I think we need to be aware of these issues, but accept that we need to move forward in a way and not just hang around talking about it and going, oh, this isn't perfect, so let's not do it.
Today I'm joined by chemical engineer Yasmin Ali, author of Power Up, an engineer's adventures into sustainable energy. We're going to talk about imagination, innovation, practicality and individual power in the fight against the climate crisis, and just some really interesting stuff about robots cleaning solar panels in deserts. This is The Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. This is The Creative Condition, the show where we explore all facets of creativity to help you understand and embrace yours. I hope you're well this week. It's been pretty hot here in the UK, for us lot at least. We haven't quite tipped 30, we maybe just touched upon it midweek. And I guess any of you guys in hotter countries will be chuckling away at us Brits melting in it. But it does send us a bit crazy. It's no surprise that there's been a little bit of unrest this week through horrible circumstances. But I do always wonder about the heat because, do you know, people say, they say that the UK is one of the more temperate islands on the planet as far as the climate crisis, which is something we're touching upon in today's chat with Yasmin Ali. But I think that is offset by our complete inability to deal with the heat. Do you know what I mean? I think that as other countries are kind of wrestling against horrific, actual temperatures that can kill human beings, we're going to be over here in the late 20s rolling around with cans of Stella in the street, fighting each other and delirious, because I've seen that happen so many times. But that's a little tangent. Big thank you to the sponsor, the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. Go and check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios, as well as their Trend X, frontline of the illustration industry trend report at illustrationx.com. And do please take the time to help the Ukrainian Institute, who support the Ukrainian creative community and connect them globally in this horrendous time of war. You can help them out in many, many ways. Go and have a look at ui.org.ua. Another thank you to last week's guest, Stephen Bliss, who was very popular, as well as the people before him, Alex Pask and Ben Ryan, for the Olympic Week special. Getting into judo, rugby sevens on those episodes, but you know me, always exploring far and wide for the thread of creativity that unites us all. So today, Yasmin Ali, she's fantastic. She's a chemical engineer, and I came across her when I read her wonderful book called Power Up, an engineer's adventures into sustainable energy. Huge recommendation. Very funny, interesting, takes you on some wild rides, but also very, very informative, and it brings a little hope. It brings some nice ideas for initiative and autonomy and making better decisions in our own energy use by helping us to understand the energy sector. That's what her whole mission is, and it's just brilliantly done, brilliantly written. And I think you're going to enjoy spending some time with Yasmin today. Before we get into that, the Creative Condition book is out. You can get it Kindle on the ebook Kindle store. If you're an e-reader, you can get your lovely signed 380-page paperback, 10 years worth of work on my behalf, helping you to understand and embrace your creativity at bentalonwriter.com/shop. And get in touch. Creative coaching model in development coming soon. I've done a couple of pilot sessions and I'm working it all out. Exciting times. That's enough for me. I'm going to keep these introductions a bit shorter at the moment, so get in touch if you want to get some feedback on the show. hello@bentalon.com, and please do support by sponsoring, rating, reviewing, and subscribing. Subscribing, not sponsoring. I mean, I am looking out for sponsors, but not you guys. You know what I mean. Anyway, enjoy this chat with Yasmin Ali.
I was born in Baghdad in 1987, so that was between the Iraq-Iran War and the First Gulf War. I was a kid, though, obviously, so I didn't really understand what was going on. I'd say I had like a fairly normal childhood for me. Yeah. Just playing with the cousins in the garden and that kind of stuff. But we did have water cuts and power cuts and some strange little things, like it was hard to get hold of bananas and ice cream. So when we moved away and it was a lot easier to get bananas, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But yeah, I mean, I'm always a bit wary of giving the impression that I had some kind of dire childhood. It was still good and privileged, I would say. And the experiences that I had aren't really that unique. So I've interviewed quite a few people for the book. There was a lady who works on microgrids in California in the US who had similar experiences of power cuts, which I thought was interesting. Just, Iraq, US, similar thing going on in different ways. And then I was talking to someone who grew up in Nigeria, same kind of experience. So it's not really unique. And I think it just highlights that energy has touched all of our lives. Yeah, that was a little bit about the growing up. And we moved out of Iraq when I was about 7 or 8 and lived in Jordan and then Libya, and then got to the UK when I was 11.
And you speak of that the kind of sporadic energy scarcity. I think that children have a way of not, I don't know if benefiting is the right word, but they can certainly work with scarcity in terms of play and curiosity. And I see it even with my own kids, we have a ludicrous amount of toys, but I see them, they'll zone in on a piece of cardboard and spend 2 hours with imaginative play, Do you think that energy scarcity had positive aspects on your personality, on your curiosity?
Maybe. I feel like I'm more resilient and more relaxed in the face of change. So, if something is different to what I expected, it doesn't really faze me that much. Whereas some people I know will just have a complete meltdown and freak out if they go somewhere and it's slightly different to what they expected. So there's a little bit of that. I'm not sure on creativity. I think we were chatting about this over email. Having gone down the science and engineering route, it's been like beaten out of me. So I'm having to work hard to get that creativity back. But I mean, I definitely had it as a child, and in school I was really into art and languages and everything else. But yeah, it's a shame that we do get it. We are separated into these two boxes.
Yeah, it's something I think will come up through some of the stories that I'd like to touch upon from your book later on. But first, so what were the seeds of, what sparked your interest in energy as an industry? Or when did you first become aware of that, and what were your first moves towards it?
So I studied chemical engineering at university, and that was nothing to do with wanting to be in the energy sector or anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do as a teenager. I found it all quite overwhelming because there's so many different career choices, and there's this pressure to pick something that's perfect, because at that age I didn't really understand that I can do something and then change and go and do something else. I thought, okay, this is it. I'm making a decision for the rest of my life. My parents are doctors, medical doctors. So I applied to study medicine because I understood what a doctor does. And I was like, okay, that's meaningful. I can make people feel better. But I didn't get into uni 2 years in a row. And I thought, okay, maybe the medical profession doesn't want me. Also, I had done lots of work experience in hospitals, and every time I fainted, which I should have taken as a clue to go and do something else. But I got a leaflet in the post from the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and that was advertising chemical engineering careers, and it talked about all the different sectors that chemical engineers can work in. So anything from food, water, energy, pharmaceuticals. And it said they were some of the highest paid graduates, and that appealed to my 17-year-old self. So yeah, I went off to study chemical engineering, not really knowing much or where it was going to take me. I had a neighbor who worked for an energy company, and he said, "Why don't you apply for a summer placement?" So I did, and I ended up working at this gas-fired power station in the middle of Lincolnshire. That was really the introduction for me to the energy sector, and that moment where I was like, "Oh, hang on, there are all these power stations that generate electricity. That's why I can do all the stuff that I do at home." And I learned more about National Grid, who operate the transmission cables, so all of those pylons that you see when you're driving up the motorway that move that electricity from where it's produced to where it's used. And I suddenly thought, okay, this is kind of exciting stuff. Everyone needs energy. I can make an impact and a difference without being a doctor by being an engineer in the energy sector.
There's something lovely about that, that's transferable. That will to do good and to be additive, I guess, in the world is innately transferable. And I guess sometimes you don't always realize that until you get a bit more life experience. I was very much the same. You think, well, what I'm choosing right now for my degree, oh my God, I'm locking myself in. This is it, and it's not always the case, is it?
No, I mean, I would have never even imagined or dreamed that I would write a book or do quite a lot of the other stuff that I've done that isn't really advertised as engineering, but when you get into it, you can take all these like little branches sideways and do all this exciting stuff.
Yeah, very much so. Could you, I mean, is there a nutshell description for chemical engineering? Because it's interesting, but having read your book and read it twice now in quite quick succession, I still couldn't give a nutshell description of chemical engineering.
Yeah, so the description I normally use and other chemical engineers use is that we turn raw materials into useful products. So that is quite wide, as you can imagine. It could be anything from mining a metal and then turning that into, I don't know, a part for an aeroplane. And then the chemical engineers will be involved in that full chain. So from the very early, maybe research and development work, all the way to construction of a mine, to then the operations. And then that can be, you could be doing very technical engineering stuff, or you could be doing the commercial side, or you could be doing, I don't know, the contracts for a certain part of the job. So it's incredibly wide, which is why it's hard to describe.
Yeah, and I guess which is what brings the sort of adventurous aspect to it, which is, it's very exciting to me to as a reader.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of many people that work in the energy sector, but I know chemical engineers who are in brewing of beer or food industry and pharmaceuticals, and everything that we use in our lives has been manufactured or mined or kind of like made at some point, and I can almost guarantee that a chemical engineer was involved at some point along the way.
Yeah. And we mentioned, in the build up to this chat, we mentioned the is it the International Women in Engineering Day? Let's touch upon that a little bit. I mean, it's something. I mean, it's very much an assumption from the outside looking in, but it would strike me as an industry that might be quite male dominated. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is correct. So at the moment, women make up 16% of the engineering workforce in the UK. That has gone up slightly. So when I first started about 10, 15 years ago, it was 12%. So it's creeping up, and hopefully that trend continues. But I think women are missing out on this incredible career and this chance to shape the world that we live in. And I would say I've had a generally positive experience. I've found the vast majority of my male colleagues to be very supportive. We are all people. We're all kind of the same, just because a different gender doesn't make us really that different to each other.
No, of course. And having done now 300 plus interviews and for this show alone, but also, 20 plus years in the arts and in the design industry, I have countless female friends, but also I just, the more I do this, the more I explore creativity, I see the joining of dots across many different fields. So I can completely get that. Some of the brains that I see in motion is inspiring to me, and I can see countless ways they could be used in the world far beyond design. Like we said earlier about the kind of transformative ability of these personal skills. So I can completely see some of those characters, in that sector. That's quite exciting. So I think, and especially as a father of a daughter, she's got a really inquisitive mind. She's very expressive, but also hyper focused at times. And it excites me to think that people like yourself working in this industry and sharing that experience through your book. That's exciting for me because she's going to be growing up in a world where those opportunities are going to be more plentiful than they once might have been.
I hope so. I still see a lot of examples where, it's usually a girl who's good at maths, good at science, and then they get to GCSE level and they're good at art as well and quite creative. And they get to GCSEs and they drop the sciences or as much of it as possible and go down the arts route. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit. I wish they could continue with everything. And maybe, that's just a flaw in the design of the education system. And even more so when you get to A levels and you're only doing 3 or 4 subjects, really limits your choices beyond that. But I wish people could continue with more subjects for longer and then make slightly more informed decisions when they get to career choices, because it's quite a lot of pressure to put on a 15, 16-year-old to say, choose the subjects now that are going to determine what you do for the rest of your life. I think that's, it's too much.
It really is. And I touch upon this in my own book, and I think it's crazy. Nobody knows who they are at that age. And in fact, the science is that, the part of the, I'm sorry, I lack the terminology, but I know the part of the brain that makes decisions is the last to develop, and so therefore teenagers' brains aren't fully wired, So it's like, so that's why we make so many impulsive, erratic decisions at that age. So to put that weight on a kid at that age is just counterintuitive to me. And also, having spoken to countless people in science and engineering and arts, it's the one in all of those sectors, when you get cross-pollination and you get collaboration across those fields, that's where the magic happens, and that's where the pioneering goes on. Speaking of those odd connections, so I just finished being part of a seminar with a guy called Kyle Chaker, who's written a brilliant book called Filter World. And it's about algorithms flattening culture. The similarity that I see between his book and yours is that you need to understand the state of play before we can make informed decisions and make transformations that's needed. And, in Kyle's regard, it's kind of, here's where we are. There's a real stasis because of globalization and algorithmic trends, kind of flattening culture. All coffee shops across the world, they look the same, and it's spilling out into the real world. His thing is, here's where we are. Now work to be the courageous one who breaks that and gets actually creative again. There's a very similar thing I see with your book, and it's presenting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I read it. You're presenting how this works. Here's what we need to do to make the changes we need now to get towards sustainable energy.
Yeah. I think maybe that comes from the engineering education that's been drilled into me, but you do spend a lot of time understanding and dissecting what the problem is before you then start to solve it. So I think that is what I've tried to do. So I'm glad that comes across. It's called Power Up, an engineer's adventures into sustainable energy. So that's me. And it's my journey in the global energy sector. It's split into 3 parts. So how we move and use energy. And it's lots of my own stories from my time in the energy sector over the last 14 years and still going. And it's stories from history and other people that I've spoken to and places that I visited for the book.
And it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, because you've struck that perfect balance for me of completely engaging in terms of just sheer storytelling and an enjoyable read, articulated in, to take such complex information and relay that in a way that I can not only understand it but actively enjoy it is wonderful. But also strikes me as really important too. So yeah, that said, paint us a picture of where we are, because I have routine panics about climate crisis.
Mhm.
You know, I've gotten better at managing that now in a way that I can try to take action and
Mhm.
share what I learn about it, as opposed to slumping into kind of doom and gloom states of anxiety. But paint us a little picture about where we are and where we need to be moving, because I know there's a lot of conversations now about sustainable and renewable. One of
Mhm.
the things I picked up from your book was that renewable doesn't necessarily mean clean, so this is a big factor.
Yeah, I guess, well, let's start with maybe the bad news. um, so globally, I think it's about 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. That's changing, but it's quite slow. The good news is that the renewable sector is booming, and the rate of change, the rate of installation of wind farms and solar panels and other renewable technologies is increasing at quite a rapid rate. So that's good. Um, I think it is quite a complex system and it is a global issue. Um, we now understand the impact of fossil fuels on the planet and we know that we need to move. We kind of have to be coordinated as a whole society. And we're not starting from this blank sheet of paper where we're designing a perfect energy system. So we have to work with what we've got and accept that it's not going to be perfect. So, yes, I highlight in the book that, for example, if you put up a wind turbine, you use lots of concrete for the foundations. Manufacturing concrete emits carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And nowadays, or today, wind turbine blades aren't very recyclable. That's becoming a more important topic. People are looking at how you construct these wind turbine blades in a way that makes them more easily recyclable at the end of their life. So it's not perfect, but it's such a massive improvement from burning a bunch of oil in a power station. So I think we need to be aware of these issues, but accept that we need to move forward in a way and not just hang around talking about it and going, oh, this isn't perfect, so let's not do it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess one of the advantages you'll have by working in the sector is seeing that sea change and feeling that momentum in a
Mhm.
way that, like I said before, you could shine your light on, the 80% fossil fuels and the
Mm.
downside of this and the effects we're seeing all around us right now in terms of global warming.
Mhm.
But it's always far better to shine your light on what is good and what we can affect and what we can move forward with. So, do you feel optimistic in that sense? Are you good at shining your light on that stuff?
I am. I'm quite an optimistic person. Otherwise, I think I would just be crying all the time. So, yeah, I do like to look for those good examples. I think maybe one example is, or one thing that I feel is often forgotten is energy efficiency. So, one of the very powerful ways to reduce emissions is to reduce our energy use in the first place. And we can do that by making our world more efficient. Um, One of the big energy users in the UK is heating. So we all have these gas boilers in our homes that heat our spaces, and they burn natural gas and emit carbon dioxide. Having more efficient homes would reduce the heat that we need to use. But I went to visit something called the Hockerton Housing Project, which is a collection of 5 eco homes in Nottinghamshire. And they have houses that don't need any heating at all because they've been so well designed. The homes face the right way, so they're oriented towards the sun in a correct way, and they've got so much thick insulation around them that half of the heat for the homes comes from the sun, even in the winter. The other half comes from the body heat of the people living there and the
Wow.
appliances that they use, so the ovens and kettles and whatever. And it's just such a great example of it's something really quite simple. The houses aren't super expensive, so the people who designed and built them wanted to show that you can do this for a reasonable price, and that is how we should be doing things.
Well, yeah, I mean that's mind blowing, but it sounds like it shouldn't be. It sounds like, it makes me think of even in the book where you look back at a time when solar might have got the nod, had, am I right in saying that had the development of it, right? You're the one to tell me this. So is it the voltaic?
Photovoltaic effect,
The
I think.
voltaic effect. There it is. I thought I had
Yeah.
that down. Yes. So am I right in thinking that when this kind of initial, in fact, let's start by talking about solar a little bit. What
Mhm.
what was the initial? Because that was incredible. The initial discovery of solar energy. How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways that we can use the energy from the sun. I think if I was religious, I would probably worship the sun because that's what keeps us alive. But yeah, there's people used it for heat for a very long time. So they would, in Roman baths, they would have like transparent glass to capture the heat from the sun. So that's one way that's quite simple, and that's how the Hockerton Housing Project makes one use out of the sun. The other way is this photovoltaic effect, which is basically a reaction that takes the energy from the sun and converts it to electricity. That's what solar panels do. Please don't ask me how they work because I can never remember. I have to go and look back in the book to remind myself. But yeah, it's conversion of sunlight into electricity, and that effect was discovered in the 1800s, I think. But they didn't really know what to do with it. It was just this kind of fun scientific curiosity, and then eventually it developed into solar panels, but they were very inefficient and expensive. That was then picked up later in time, and eventually solar panels were used in space missions. So they were sent up in space, where before the solar panels, they would send up these chemical batteries that would last for a couple of weeks or maybe 2 months and then run out of energy. Whereas solar panels, they last kind of almost an indefinite amount of time. So that was a big game changer, but they were still very expensive. But then over time, there were other scientific discoveries and changes to the materials that mean today I think it is the cheapest form of electricity generation, um, which is incredible. That's that countries that maybe don't have such a heavy fossil fuel industry that are in sunny locations could just bypass that whole fossil fuel thing and go straight to solar or wind if they've got the resources for that. I don't know if I
Yeah.
answered your question. I've just gone off on a bit
Yeah.
of a
No.
rant about the sun and
No.
how much
No.
I love
You.
it.
No. You very much did, but I find it quite interesting, these kind of
Mhm.
these moments in history when
Yeah.
might have been a different way, where had we had the resources or had we had this sort of acceleration, you
Yeah, and
know.
I guess what kind of happened a couple of times is solar almost made it, but then fossil fuels have always been quite cheap and easy, and they are amazing because they're so energy dense.
Yeah.
Uh, so a small amount of oil can do a lot for us. It's a good source of energy. That's why we use it. That's why we've relied on it.
Mhm.
But yeah, unfortunately, it comes with consequences.
Yeah. And like you said, about the kind of, if we had a blank sheet of paper on this, things would be very different. The fact is we don't, which
Mhm.
is for me where the kind of the creativity comes in. And when I say creativity, I don't, one of the things I started doing with my own book right at the start, I wanted to dispel the myth that creativity is just artistry. That's one. Of course, there's a famed relationship there, and we very much love it. That's where we get our culture. But as creativity, one of my favorite definitions is by Sir Ken Robinson, and it's the ability to have ideas that have value, the process of having ideas that have value. And I like to break creativity down into kind of three I's: so imagination, inventiveness, and innovation. And this is what I'm talking about in regards to the stories in your book. When you have to work with that many well entrenched moving parts to come up with these solutions that we all need, my word, that's a task. But there are so many incredible examples. So the cleaning robots on solar farms. This is one bit that my poor wife gets the shit when I'm reading books like this. She gets the really bad prattled version of. But if you tell us about
loved that bit too. I keep overhearing him telling people about about this bit. So this is from. I was speaking to someone who works on a massive solar park in India. It's called Badla. And they have, these like thousands of solar panels, which get very dusty because there's dust storms. It's very dry, obviously, because it's a desert. And what they used to do was people would come along with a bucket and a mop, essentially, and clean down these solar panels. So I came across this company who make these solar panel cleaning robots, and they're like those brushes that you get in a car wash, and they just, without the water, it's all dry. So brushes will travel along a what's the right word, like a gantry or whatever it might be that's installed along the solar panel, and they just sweep all of the dust off, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they do it in the evening so that they're not blocking the sunlight from the solar panels. So they try and do it at the least disruptive time. And the robots have their own solar panels to power them so that they're not taking electricity from the solar park.
It's incredibly cool. We seem to be reaching a point in our in our world now where kind of sci-fi is almost becoming the non-fiction.
Yeah, that always happens. I think sci-fi is the predictor of what's coming in the scientific world, which is a bit scary when you watch shows like Black Mirror.
Yeah,
and it's like so close to reality, but not quite there.
I write fiction in my own time, and I had it once described as a cross between Black Mirror and Roald Dahl.
Roald Dahl was quite scary, I think.
I'm reading with my kids are both four, got twins, and we're reading Roald Dahl at the minute, and there are bits where I kind of have to go, oh, have I jumped the gun here? They're going to be nightmares. And what I wanted to touch upon, and I hoped you could kind of work with me on this, I wanted to sort of run a little, going with the message of understanding the energy system, to make better decisions as an individual and also as a tribe of people, I guess. I wanted to sort of just take you through an average day. I'm going to use my day as an example, but throw in a couple of little examples along the way. And I hoped that you could kind of give us some insights in terms of the energy use, but also the work that goes into making that possible. So we don't have to kind of itemize everything, but as a nutshell thing. So, of course, so it's getting out of bed, let's say phone alarm, for example, to kick off, and then shower. We'll have a wash of some kind, and then putting on clothes. Now, that one thing that I forgot is that there is oil in our clothes, for example.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about that little set of things to start with.
Sure. I mean, it depends how far back you want to go. But I think a lot of those, I was going to say a lot of them use electricity, but I mean, we could go in a different direction and say that for you to be able to get out of bed, you need to have eaten. And that food is grown in a field, which probably required some kind of fertilizer. That fertilizer was made in a factory, and that factory needed an energy input. And fertilizers tend to be made from ammonia, which is a very, very energy intensive activity, emits quite a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So yeah, how far back do you want to take it?
Yeah, no, I love that. No, really far back. I mean, because I think the idea is that I'd like to sort of go through the overwhelming side of it to begin with,
Hmm.
to paint the picture of just what's going on, and then maybe ask a couple of questions
Yeah.
about how we sort of don't get overwhelmed and make
Hmm.
better decisions.
Yeah. So let's put that to one side. So there's the fertilizer for your food, and then all the machines that harvested those crops. Anyway, but a lot of the other stuff you mentioned uses electricity. So if we take the UK as an example, that electricity is generated from a lot of it is from natural gas power stations these days. If people are interested, you can Google grid watch, and that
Mm.
shows you every half hour where the UK's electricity is being generated from. It's quite interesting to
Ah,
see, like on a hot summer's day like this would be quite different to the winter. But yeah, so that electricity could come from a gas-fired power station or a wind farm or maybe some solar panels. It might be coming through some interconnectors. So we have cables that connect us to mainland Europe and to Ireland. So we might be getting some French nuclear power coming to the UK to give us our electricity. And then, yeah, that electricity is then feeding your devices and setting off your alarm. Although some of those devices will have batteries, so that's slightly different how, those batteries would have been manufactured, and there's all kinds of metals and materials involved with that. Um, and then, yeah, maybe, I don't know if we've got to the internet bit yet, but there's going to be data centers that need a power supply and cooling to keep them cool.
yeah. See, now this is one of my areas of concern, and I'm hoping you
Hmm.
can kind of clarify a little bit. So,
Hmm.
I was very concerned with some of the things I was reading about, for example, blockchain technology and NFTs when that happened, because I saw some very avoidable uses, and it struck me as very much a kind of it was another .com boom. It was something that was going to be a flash in the pan. But if that flash in the pan is as energy intensive as some of the reports I was reading, that was very worrying to me. And whether people were aware and doing it anyway or just not aware, I guess it doesn't affect too much because it's being done. So there's that, and then there's artificial intelligence, which is just exponentially expanding at the moment. What kind of percentage are we talking in terms of, I don't know, emissions and
Yeah,
the power required?
I was trying to look into this, and it's not very well defined. Um, yeah, because again, it depends where you draw the boundary. But if you look at um, the internet and all of our devices and the data centers and everything that's within that kind of world of computing, I think the number that I got to, which is not, I'm not really very confident on it. And maybe because it's such a new area and hasn't been as well studied as some of our 100-year-old industries, but I think it's about 1% of our global energy use. So
Okay.
when you compare it to cement manufacture or steel or some of those big heavy industries, it's not really that, it's not making a huge dent in energy use. But I can see that growing quite quickly because, as you say, I mean, yeah, you've got like AI and machine learning and blockchain and all these new technologies coming on, and they are quite energy intensive. Uh, I mean, it's, I sit, you go to a gig now and everybody's got their phones out and they're taking a 1 minute video that's probably being uploaded to the cloud. So all of that stuff is going to build up, and I think that energy demand will increase, and also will reduce our energy demand in other industries probably. So that proportion will increase, if that makes sense. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's something worth thinking about now, like what do we want that online world to look like, and how much data do we want to store and why, and what is a meaningful use of our energy resources.
That's the thing exactly. Yeah. And it's
Hmm.
the flagrant stuff that that it sort of irritates me and alarms me.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
endless TikToks and the
yeah.
arbitrary uses and the stuff. Maybe you could just wait until you see your friend and tell them about your tea.
That's like culture, isn't it? So do
Yeah,
you
you're
want
right.
to? Because there's loads of stuff like that in our physical world. Like, people go on holiday and they buy a little fridge magnet or whatever. That's not, you don't need that, but people like to have that. And I think
Hmm.
it's sort of the same with data. It's like an online culture.
I think you're right. Yeah, and you do have to be mindful because maybe that is important to some people, and I'm being a little a little cynical as a 41-year-old man who grew up without it. There is that. This is why I love your book and your work because I think once I know that, it makes me far more mindful. So one change that I've been making since reading your book, specifically because of, is just stopping to think before I get my phone out to, let's say, look for an image or put, I'll give you an example. The other Saturday morning, I was sat and my kids were drawing Marvel characters. And it was lovely. I sat there with my coffee. I'm getting the benefits of now being four, and they can do that stuff and not have to be supported along the way. But my lad he didn't know what color palette to use for Miss Marvel. He couldn't remember what she was, and I was about to get my phone out. They said to me, actually, can you look it up on your phone? And I went, yeah. Got my phone in my pocket, stopped myself, went, hang on a minute. So I ran upstairs, went through his little library of books, found an annual where I thought there was an image of Miss Marvel. There was. I felt good about myself because I didn't use any power doing that. It was kind of, that was, and I thought, okay, that was probably a really incremental use. Had I looked it up, it was probably tiny and relatively insignificant. But
Mhm.
like anything, we have however many billion people on the planet. So you scale that across everyone. As more people in more countries get access to digital information and the internet, that might not be so insignificant, you know?
True. Yeah.
So, it was
It's
just a
like a
little
habit,
moment.
isn't it? It's like building up those good habits. Yeah. I mean, the clothes thing is a bit of an issue as well with the society that we live in and this fast fashion culture. And that, yeah, I mean, we are talking about energy, but there are links with other things. And I think the whole sustainability and recycling subject is quite interesting and closely linked with energy. So we are using up water and resources to make, a t-shirt or whatever that someone also that's being shipped halfway around the world to somebody and they wear it once and then maybe chuck it in the bin and it ends up in a landfill. And
Mhm.
if you stop to think about that, it's just quite depressing.
It is. And I've just finished reading 15 Minute City by Professor Carlos Moreno. I don't know if you're aware of it and the concept. I'm interviewing him in a couple of weeks, which I'm very excited about. But he was the sort of pioneering mind behind, I say pioneering, his whole thing in there is that this is not a new idea, but it's about bringing things more local again and reducing the need for transportation, long journeys and commutes and stagnant traffic and things like that cause big emissions. But his thing is all about the many benefits of doing that, of bringing together local communities again and redesigning cities so that they're people first. So one of the questions off the back of that I wanted to ask you was about the role of the automotive industry and cars, of course, because I know there was this big explosion from the 1920s onwards and the way we transformed the cities in terms of the freeways, and they became less about people and more about longer journeys and making that possible. And I know that, of course, the automotive industry continues, and of course airplanes too continue to have a massive influence on the energy industry. Do you see change there?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, right? Because again, it comes down to culture. So my family live all over the world. My partner is from Canada, so I can't really exactly say I'm never getting on a plane again, or I'm not. I don't have a car, but I live in a city with lots of public transport, and I know that that's not the case for everybody. Um, but yeah, there's with cars, I mean, that was one of the reasons for the massive boom in the oil sector. So, we've talked a lot about electricity, but a lot of the energy that we use is for transport. It's petrol powered cars that really fuel not to maybe that's the wrong word to use, but they kind of fuel the oil industry. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as we shift to electric vehicles or maybe hydrogen vehicles. What happens to the oil industry when that shift takes place? But I can't really see. I don't expect everyone to stop driving overnight. That's not going to
No.
happen. We are in this world where we have, family and friends and partners who are scattered. Our jobs aren't where we live necessarily. Our entertainment is spread out, and there are lots of benefits to traveling. So I think it would be hypocritical of me to say everyone has to stop flying now, when I get to do it and I enjoy doing it.
And and this is the thing. I had a conversation recently with a guy who works. He uses his kind of design skills to work with organizations doing some incredible work. So things like bioplastics and plastic eating fungi and really kind of cutting edge technologies to help them present what they're doing in a visual language, so that they can get better funding, better access to to making that work happen. Really interesting stuff that he does. And I remember him saying to me, because I had this job that I just got back from it in France, and I initially turned it down because I didn't want to fly, and it was my only action. But in the end, I couldn't afford not to take the job on. And he said to me, no, you should. He said, you should. It's not. I think you taking that one flight is it's not insignificant, but it's not. We need to be making change elsewhere. We need to be making widespread change, and I guess this comes back to your work in the energy sector too. That's where the real change will happen on that front. Is that something you'd agree with?
I do, and I think there's been, I don't know, maybe like a period of time where people have been made to feel responsible as individuals, and we are in a way, but you can't, like, you not taking a flight it's just a drop in the ocean. It's not gonna make a difference. And it's about big structural changes, really. And I think, you're never going to be able to have like a zero emission life, because that would mean you're no longer allowed to walk into any building that's made of concrete. So it's just not possible or practical. I think it's down to governments, energy companies, and the people who are in the industry who can make that change. But that has to be supported by the public and by individuals. So I would encourage people to take measures that they can take to reduce their energy use or to live a more sustainable life. But don't take the entire burden onto your own shoulders. It's like a cost issue as well. So you could switch to a renewable energy provider, but if that's more expensive and you can't afford that, then I wouldn't expect someone to make that choice.
Yeah, again, it's the thing, isn't it? It's the class divide thing again. It's the people who have the luxury of making such a choice and not noticing that in the bank account that should be making those changes. Unfortunately, it seems to go the other way as a general rule. Even though, of course, not everyone. There's a lot of great philanthropists out there who do great work with what they've earned. Some of the standout examples of kind of innovation and imagination that come in your book, even things that I would never have considered. So looking for natural gas, and you mentioned this, and it seems to me like there's a degree of creativity required to access it once it's been discovered. Is that true?
Probably. I think it's hard for me to see that because I've been in it, and it's just like it's how it is. What I did quite like from the natural gas industry is the whole thing about liquefied natural gas. I think that was kind of a creative story that came from a different industry. So, talking to your point of bringing different people together. So it was a guy in the US who worked in the meat business. In Chicago, I think he ran this massive meat company, and he was struggling with electricity prices for his business. And I think he dug out some patent from lots of years ago and picked it up. And it was about how you can turn natural gas, which is in a gaseous state, into a liquid. And so if you cool it and compress it enough, it turns into a liquid and takes up much less space when you want to transport it on a ship. So he looked into doing that and bringing gas in from Louisiana to, I'm going to say Chicago. I can't quite remember now. And yeah, it worked. It didn't work out for his business in the end, but he worked with other people in the energy sector. And now we have this massive industry of moving gas as a liquid. And that I don't know if I'm making sense here or if I've lost lost people.
No, you haven't lost people at all. It's no. I had it in my notes. It's a wonderful example, and it does speak to that. I think the power of the individual and personal imagination, because I think that necessity, of course, mother of invention. That's the cliched term, but it's a great one, and I think that sometimes we can feel very powerless in our day-to-day lives, but I see so many examples now that that's not the case. And there's a great example. So one of the books that had a profound effect on me recently was Stefan Sagmeister's Now is Better. So Stefan's one of the most famous graphic designers of all time. He's Austrian designer. He's an incredible character. And he felt the toxicity of social media and the kind of the alarming effect that the news cycles have on the evolutionary part of our brain that is designed to recognize fear, was massively outweighing the progress in human history. That if we could take a longer term view of human history, that we would see all the great things we have overcome and to harness that optimism to tackle the big things we face today. And one of the examples, his foreword was written by Steven Pinker. And Steven Pinker wrote about John Graunt, who was a British haberdasher who, just out of personal curiosity about causes of death, accidentally invented epidemiology.
That's quite handy.
And that to me was just a really inspiring example of personal lines of inquiry and personal curiosities.
Yeah.
And given all the sources of information we have today, that you should absolutely trust in that, and that need for collaboration and inter-industry conversations and not segregating everything so much is really important, because these stories happen, the ones that you've talked about, and I think another one, burying nuclear waste in rock.
Yeah, I mean, one of the concerns that lots of people have about the nuclear sector is, what do you do with the waste? So there's a company in Finland who are putting their nuclear waste into geological stores, so 450 meters underground into these tunnels that have mostly been dug now, into this very stable geological rock formation. And then you just leave it down there and it does its thing.
Am I right in thinking that's, these geological formations of, they've survived dinosaur times and they've,
they've been around for millions of years, I'm going to say. Yeah. And they're very stable. They don't really change. So quite safe to put the nuclear waste down there and let it lose its radioactivity over time. What I found quite intriguing, actually, is when I first came across the idea, I thought that there would be like barbed wire fencing and lots of signs around this site to warn, generations who are generations 1,000 years from now about the stuff that's underground. But when I spoke to someone from the company, he said, no, we just seal it up and we don't put anything there. And that way, no one has any reason to kind of dig or be there. He said, if you put signs up, people are curious and they'll come and dig and see what's going on. And there's nothing of value in those rocks that is going to be mined, or not to our current knowledge anyway, but you never know, like 1,000 years from now, maybe there would be something that's valuable down there and people will dig and find this radioactive waste. Who knows? I wanted to mention Solar Polar. So they are a startup who, again, I thought of it when I was talking about digging out patents, because they found some patents of a technology called solar. Sorry, I can't remember now what it's called. It's like a refrigeration technology. So you convert sunlight directly into cooling. It's quite complicated how it works. It's all kind of very confusing thermodynamics. It's a little bit like a fridge, or like a backwards fridge. But yeah, they are developing these cooling machines that will just take the sunlight and turn it into cold, which is incredible. You don't have to generate the electricity and then power an air conditioning unit like we're used to. And they're working at the moment on these outdoor solar heaters for pubs. So this is one of my hates, is those outdoor heaters where you're just wasting electricity to heat the outside. um, but people want to stand outside and they want to be warm. So I think it's a good compromise to give them this solar heating solution.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you hear of things like that, it heartens and you think, okay. It's a big question. Can we do this under capitalism? I think I hear so many wondrous things like this and have to believe that the reason that we're not throwing everything at making that widespread has a lot to do with vested interest. Can we do it under this system?
I think we have to, because we're kind of stuck with the system for now. Yeah. I read a book. I did an event with a guy called Gwyn Dyer, who's written a book called Intervention Earth, and it's about a bit of a wider look at climate change and carbon removals. And he tackles this a little bit, and he did change my mind because he just points out that we are sort of stuck with the system, so we have to work with it. It's going to be a lot more energy to fight the system and try and change it than work within the boundaries that exist already. So, yeah, I mean, renewable energy is now affordable. Energy businesses are moving this way. I would like to see more commitment from the oil companies. And then you've got like the banks and the investors are also jumping on these opportunities. So I think it is doable. If the renewable energy sector thinks in a capitalism way, which they are doing. I think the question is, will it be what they call like a just transition, or are we going to just end up with the continued divide in society and inequality?
Yeah, because that plays a major part, doesn't it? And you only have to look at the way that somehow, the quest for net zero has become politically demonized.
Yeah.
In the same vein that, we constantly hear people shouting the word woke now, and you can see why. It's entrenched in media and political agenda. And it's really sad, that that's the case. But I think this is why I like the work of Professor Moreno, because it's about people first communities and cities. And one of his things is about reintegrating classes. And instead of filing people on low incomes away in impoverished areas that are not cared for in the same way, and then demonizing the kids who end up in violence, instead we should be making great. It's George Monbiot who talks about private sufficiency, public luxury. That's what he wants to see. He wants to see, grand, luxurious parks that everyone can access and come together and have community events. We all have what we need, garden house, the things, but instead it's about carving up these expanses that are owned by rich people and giving that back to people so that we can come together and actually have real-time conversations instead of being, divisions causing us to look upon the other, whatever the other might look like in somebody else's eyes, as the enemy, and then progress doesn't happen that way. Instead we all end up at each other's throats.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's all very sensible.
Yeah. So in terms of tips, what would you say to someone? Where would you advise? Again, another big question. But where would you advise someone like me who cares deeply about the environment and wants to contribute somehow to this cause of getting us where we need to be in regards to energy?
I think beginning to understand what the system is and how it's put together is probably a good start, just so that you start from an informed place. And then there are, some small changes, I guess, that someone can think about. So can you insulate your house to reduce your heating bill and energy use? Can you have a renewable energy supplier? Can you drive less? This one's a subject that isn't talked about much, but if you eat less meat, that would help with emissions, or if everybody ate less meat or none. And then, yeah, I think one powerful thing to do is to engage politically. So when we vote, look at those parties' energy manifestos and look at what they're planning to do. And if you're coming at it from an informed place, you can choose which one you think is more committed to net zero and to the energy transition. Yeah, I think that's, and I don't, I wouldn't put the pressure on yourself to make the right choices all of the time. I think if you can make some incremental progress, that's a good start.
Yeah. Yeah, if you don't mind, let's just a little. I'd love to just a little nutshell of the meat thing, because I'm borderline vegan for that very reason. And I was kind of shocked when I learned what I learned through documentaries like Cowspiracy, and some people might say, "Oh, it's very biased towards X, Y, and Z." But the science and the facts are there about about land use in animal agriculture. So if you could touch upon that in regards to energy, I think that would help. There's probably people listening to this who are sort of somewhere wavering, maybe on the fence. I'd like just to kind of paint a picture of that for them.
Yeah, so it's less to do with energy and more about emissions. So I think it's about a fifth of global emissions come from farming, and most of those emissions come from ruminant animals, so cows and sheep, that basically they burp and fart methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And so if we had less cows and sheep around, there would be less methane in the atmosphere and less greenhouse gases and the impact that they have on the environment. That's kind of it in a nutshell. But yeah, there's the land use side as well. So large amounts of land are used for farming, and also growing the crops that we're feeding to the animals. So it's kind of an efficiency thing. So we are, I think we could consume more calories by eating the stuff that's grown to feed the cows rather than waiting to eat the cows. I think I haven't fact checked this though. Does that answer the question?
It does. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And with the land use thing, it's about that we know the benefits of reforestation and more importantly, not cutting the original ones down in the first place, which soaks up the carbon. One of the basic science facts you learn at school, and I think that's critical too. And I do see that as one of the biggest immediate actions any one of us can take. And a fifth is massive.
And that, I think that message is never going to come from a government, because they're too scared to say to people, you shouldn't be eating this. It's seen too much as a nanny state. So I think that has to come from us as individuals. And if enough of us eat less meat, then that industry is going to have to shrink.
Yes.
But which actually raises another ethical point. So what happens to those farmers and those farms? Because tied in with the energy sector and any other sector really is it's the livelihoods of people. So if you make a change, you have to think about that and think, how do I bring those people along with me? And we're seeing that in the steel sector in the UK, where steel mills are shutting down and really just decimating jobs for people in certain areas. And that just shouldn't happen. If you're going to shut something down, you need to think about the people and what they're going to do next.
Yes, you do. The transition is absolutely critical, and I in a perfect world, I like to think that the people could be retrained and helped to sort of fight the cause and use the same land they might have always worked on, but to be educated in what we need next in terms of reforestation and helping naturalization processes and things like that, because. It might be that I don't know, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of all that, but it's the same thing. I was writing a piece last week on AI in terms of image making. A lot of my listeners are visual communicators of some kind, whether they're graphic designers or illustrators or photographers. And there's a real fear around AI at the minute because of exponential growth of image making technology that's landed right in everyone's laps, especially our
Mhm.
employers.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of, oh, shit, but what about me? And rightly so, I'm right there with them. However,
Mhm.
I would very quickly then point to the poor people who lost their job on the checkout in the supermarkets.
Mm.
The way I put it in my piece, they're not sat in their back garden drinking cocktails, that's for sure. So you're right. I think we have to do it carefully, and we have to look at that. But I do think it's an immediate first step. And then, like I mentioned, the visual communicator thing is very powerful.
Mhm.
So I would encourage people listening, to think about how they can take some of this wonderful image that's in your book, for example, or
Mhm.
to do with these bits of progress we can make quite
Mhm.
quickly, and look at ways to tell that in an engaging, inclusive way, because that's power too.
Yeah, and I think just back to the meat thing, sometimes people will go like, "Oh, I can't go vegan; it's just too much." But you don't have to go vegan. I think if you reduce your meat consumption to twice a week or something, or reduce your red meat consumption specifically, that can make quite a big difference. So it's not like these massive lifestyle changes. You can do small things as well.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we went pescatarian recently because I
Mhm.
learned from another guest, Kimberly Wilson, who's a psychologist specializes in nutrition, about the importance of omega-3 fatty acids. So
Mhm.
panicked as a father of young kids and sort of reintroduced, one portion of fish a week. But I
Mhm.
try to source it responsibly as I can. I think about it. I spend a bit more and a bit less. And
Mhm.
whereas in my younger years, before I learned about this stuff in my late teens, I would have 4 or 5 nights a week probably just gone and bought whatever sausages were on offer in the supermarket. So that's a big change. And if every person makes such a change to even just to that degree,
Yeah.
then I think that's a major impact.
I think that is happening. So some of the younger people that I speak to now, in the context of transport, so they will look at, how much is it going to cost me to make this journey, but also think about the emissions. Whereas I think for me, when I was at school or university, it was always like, okay, what's the cheapest? I'm doing that. And it's quite nice to see that culture shift and more awareness with younger people.
Yeah, very much so. And I think so. And I think one of the other battles I'm trying to fight with all this stuff is looking out for working class people, because that's my
Mhm.
background. And
Mhm.
I was very fortunate in that I had parental support. I met the right mentors, teachers who switched me on to my character traits and where they might benefit me in the world of work. Um, but I think there's a wonderful value in that prickly energy of young people who've maybe had a tougher start, and if you can get them to switch on to their abilities and ability to succeed, and I think there's we could all I think any industry could benefit from that greater diversity in terms of
Yeah,
people who've
yeah,
had a more lucrative start in life, and the people who've had to fight, because that brings its own values. Yeah. Well, I've kept you. I could talk to you all day, but
yeah.
but I'm sure you've got other things to be getting on with. Um,
Gotta go do the energy transition.
yeah, yeah, yeah. um, I don't think there's a big point to end on. I think we've discussed a lot of things there, and I hope we've given people some nice, actionable points there. I mean, I couldn't. Oh, actually, one little thing I did want to ask that might be a nice sign off, and I would implore everyone to read Yasmin's book. But the actual process of writing the book for you,
Mm. Mhm.
did that did that help you to understand your own journey and your own learnings in your industry? Because it certainly did for me to actually have 10 years of unconscious exploration of creativity. The last 2.5 years of that decade for me was writing the book. To force myself to sit down and put all that on a page really helped me to kind of crystallize a lot of what I'd been learning. Did you have a similar experience in writing this book?
Yeah, I think so. I always did quite a lot of what I call engineering engagement. So I would go and talk to um, public audiences or school kids or whatever about my job. And I always found that quite a nice experience because it reminded me what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I would always, if I didn't do it for a while, I would kind of lose my way a little bit. And I think writing the book was a bigger version of that and just putting everything down on paper, but also exploring areas that I'd never worked in before and understanding my own feelings and attitudes towards it. So, nuclear, for example, I've never worked in nuclear power. And I think I had this internal unconscious fear And it was really useful to explore that and to try and understand why, and to get rid of that fear and replace it with some more science and fact-based thoughts. So I think maybe one other thing that I should say that people can do is to be open-minded to different energy sources, and be aware of your gut reaction to some of them. So I'm very disappointed that England has very few onshore wind farms, and that is tied to basically people not wanting to see them in the landscape. But I think maybe that could change with a change of government. Things, being opposed to a clean energy source for not very good reason, in my opinion. We just can't afford to be doing that right now. We have to be open-minded to this and use every technology that's available to us.
Yeah, it does make me despair as well. I agree with you, and the same way that certain people might challenge, a mural in the city centre because it's slightly new and it's not to their tastes. Well, let's tear it down then. Of course, it's crazy. Really, it's a subjective thing, and really, there's a far bigger picture there, as we've talked about today.
Yeah.
So yes, that's interesting, and I hope so. I hope that changes too, because if it's right there and available, then my God, let's get it done.
Yeah.
It's. I think they look great personally, but that's just me. But yeah, no, being open-minded to it is really important too, and it is to challenge those gut reactions and the sort of term as the chimp self, the evolutionary part of our brain that kind of responds a little quicker for reasons that are different in our history to what we have the power to override that with conscious thought and actually reflect a little bit before we make those calls and pick your battles. Thank you for doing this book, because it's really, really great, and I think it helps to expand what is really vital work out to a broader audience and hopefully facilitate what we've talked about today, which is collaboration and shared cause, because this affects every single one of us. No one's escaping this if it goes the wrong way. At the same time, we can all be the generation that makes the change. That's what someone said to me when I was having a bit of a low recently. Said, look, think of it as, instead of worrying about one day looking your kids in the eye if things go to shit, think about how you can tell them that you were their parent and you were part of a generation who worked and fought for the right change that now enables us to have a better future. So
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So, and I think your book is, a major contribution to that. So thank you for writing it, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Ben.
Lovely. Well, thanks again. Thank you so much to Yasmin Ali for taking the time out of her incredibly fascinating schedule as a chemical engineer. I hope you enjoyed that one. Please do go and check out her book, Power Up, An Engineer's Adventures into Sustainable Energy. It's truly brilliant. Published by Hachette UK. Great cover too. Love the cover art. I need to look up who's done that, because it's an absolute treat. I'll share that on a future episode with you when I find out. But do read it. Yasmin's ace. You can get in touch with her on social media as well. Some great episodes coming up, including Professor Carl Chin and Sarah Prinsloo in 2 separate episodes, but both covering the working class condition. It's a topic I want to push. I want to help people from my background who lack the privilege that seems to be saturating the arts in these times, in all times to a degree, let's face it. Anyway, good stuff coming up. The Creative Condition book is out now. It's 10 years worth of work. It is a real life's work for me. It's available at bentallenwriter.com/shop, signed paperbacks. You can also get your ebook on Kindle Store. Please do subscribe and rate and review the show if you get a second. It's a massive help. I know I keep asking, and I know there are more listeners than have done it, so please do help me out. It really does help to endorse the show for new potential listeners in this busy world of podcasts. I think I mentioned it the other week, but I did find out I was in the top 2%. I know there's bigger creative shows than mine who are in the top 1%, top 0.5%, but it is building. The numbers are getting better week to week. There is also the YouTube channel, so check that out also. If you want to get in touch, hello@bentallen.com. I'm open to guest pitches, and I love your feedback. Hit me up also on social, LinkedIn and Instagram predominantly, also on X occasionally. So that's about it from me. I hope you've enjoyed today with Yasmin Ali. Have a great week, guys. Chat soon.